Hello, this is Vishwanath, Rachel McLeod, and the Curve team. We want to welcome you to the Curve training on responsive feedback. It is a 4-week course designed to teach the principles and tools for responsive feedback approach in your programming. This training is brought to you by the Curve Consortium. We are a group of partners gathered to address the need for a culture of adaptation, flexibility, and experimentation in global health programs. The purpose of this program and training is to provide you with a foundation for these responsive feedback principles, with an emphasis on leveraging your programs, current resources, and strengths to improve your program while it is still in the field. Let us look at how responsive feedback is different. Traditionally, you have a set of assumptions or expectations about how your activities in the program will lead to certain outcomes. And these are often set before the program begins and then are not revisited again throughout the intervention. Even interim feedback, such as process data or feedback gathered from program staff or beneficiaries, is not available in time to make changes. Often, there is not space within a program's activities to analyze these data until the end of the program. For example, maybe there was low attendance at the intervention education sessions for the new mothers, or perhaps there was low attention paid to communication materials distributed the program. Whatever the reason, the program's activities have not worked per your expectations. And if you do not gather the data in time, then you have missed key opportunities to improve the program while it is still active in the field. It may be that your initial assumptions were incorrect and your program activities are not designed in the most optimal way to achieve your outcomes. So even if you have identified the issues mid-program, you may not have sufficient flexibility to adapt in the case of a changing situation or a crisis. So what is the definition of responsive feedback? A responsive feedback approach operates on a philosophy of observation, experimentation, testing and tweaking, and improvement. Right? The goal here is we want to identify a set of factors that may increase the program's success in a timely fashion and, where possible, implement those changes. In practice, responsive feedback relies upon observations, including both process and outcome measures. It identifies areas for iterative improvements while the program is still active in the field. That is the key. We implement these changes, or we are able to implement these changes while the program is still active in the field.
A key case study that we will refer to within this module is the State Accountability and Voice Initiative, or SAVI. SAVI was a program funded by the Department for International Development in Nigeria, supporting citizens, civil society groups, media houses, and state houses of assembly across 10 states in Nigeria to be more effective agents of citizen voice and accountability. The aim was to support these partners to play their part in more responsive, accountable, and inclusive state-level governance. SAVI emphasized promoting more open and inclusive communication between partners across sectors. They worked to encourage all of their developmental partners to take a more sustainable and replicable approach to government. Instead of taking center stage, SAVI worked in the background, helping partner organizations to assess their current capacity and build new skills. Examples of SAVI's success have included advocating for disability rights, working with partners to emphasize the importance of educating girls, and empowering the media to give voice to community issues. One of the keys to SAVI's success was the flexibility that was built into their programming. Since they operated in diverse areas, the ability to easily adapt their programs based on the barriers and facilitators to actions in each area helped them to build capacity for partner organizations to think and work politically in a number of different environments.
So, when is an RF approach valuable in a program? One of the benefits of an RF approach is that its principles can be useful at any point in the program lifecycle. Developing an initial theory of change, we will discuss that in the next module. So, developing an initial theory of change during your formative research can help you better research and articulate your assumptions about the environment in which the program operates and the best potential activities that will help you to reach your desired program outcomes. During the formative phase, you may gather input from different stakeholders or draw upon information from previous programs to both inform the program design and to identify areas for future RF testing. In the pilot phase, the program can be prototyped and tested for its success by using the RF approach. An emphasis on openness to accepting and learning from failure in these early stages is beneficial as these program approaches are adopted. As program activities are implemented in the field, making sure your monitoring and evaluation activities are helpful to make timely changes, or they allow you to do small experiments to improve your program outcomes. During the program, it is useful to revisit your theory of change, often to make sure that the data you are gathering still matches your initial assumptions. In fact, even at the end of the program, RF can be useful. It can help you determine how to bring the program to scale. It is particularly useful in setting up your theory of change to account for potential changes to assumptions that may occur in large-scale implementation of the program in different environments. As mentioned in the previous slide, a RF approach can be a valuable tool in a number of different situations and contexts. This also applies to decisions of different magnitude. For example, on the one end, there may be smaller tweaks to the program content. For example, an edit to a pamphlet, or changing the color of a poster, or improving the costs of reprinting. whatever it is, these are very small scale decisions, small tweaks to the program. In contrast, sometimes it may be it may call for a fundamental change to the program scope or key activities, which represent larger decisions. So the principles of responsive feedback, of gathering data in context and acting upon them, may be applied in any situation, small tweaks to large scale programmatic changes. The nuance may be the type of decision and who may have to be involved in making it. A typical RF approach has some characteristics. Number one, it should be agile. It captures, interprets, and responds to observed program performance in the field. It has to be adaptive. It responds and changes based on the feedback and context. Iterative. It embraces philosophy of ongoing improvement, often responding to insights in multiple rounds. An RF approach should be responsive. It should engage with the needs of the implementers and decision makers at each stage. And finally, it is actionable. It focuses on pragmatic targets. It collects quality data, potentially from multiple sources, in a timely manner to inform the design and implementation. Actionability is a key here. It has to be very pragmatic so that you can use the data to make decisions and act on them.
Savvy provides a good example of responsive feedback principles in action. First, the project was highly adaptive. They worked in 10 states across Nigeria, so the program was tailored to each individual state to make sure that it reflected the needs of the communities within those areas, but also was responsive to the ways in which the government operated in those areas, so it could best train its staff to appropriately advocate for change. Second, it was both internally and externally responsive. So within their internal structure, they would have frequent pause and reflect sessions. They would work together to monitor success and change, and they would also do so with their partners and encourage this ongoing reflection of available resources and how to improve resources so that they could better advocate. And building upon this, the program was highly actionable. They often would start small and snowball up from there. So they would take small, achievable goals that could be easily reached at the beginning of the program, achieve those goals, and then build confidence from there to create a more powerful mechanism for change as they went on and as their partners had gained more skills and more ability to advocate for the changes. MTV Sugar is a popular television show and accompanying social media website that promotes family planning in Nigeria. MTV Sugar is one of our curve case studies in which we are trying to test which messages and types of messages would gather the highest engagement for MTV Sugar audiences. So for the purposes of this project, we decided to focus on the social media component of MTV Sugar for the reasons you see here. We needed something that was more agile. If we had focused on the video component of MTV Sugar, we would have had to wait for script writing, scenes to be shot, and to be produced before messages could get out, which was too long of a timeline for us to be able to quickly test and iterate off of messages. Instead, the social media platform allowed us to quickly put out a message and see the engagement within a matter of days. So that was an easy way for us to be agile in our messages, and then we could also be iterative off of these messages because once we could see the highest performing messages, we could then quickly leverage that into the next round of experimentation and work from the most successful messages to build off of that. This was directly actionable because once we had this engagement information, we could act and put out a new message in a very quick fashion. Here we introduce our 5-step process for responsive feedback, or our curve process. As you can see, we have 5 steps that take organizations through the responsive feedback process from the beginning, from gathering resources and convening stakeholders before responsive feedback activities begin, all the way through decisions that are made as we adapt and evolve from this evidence. So as you'll see as we move through these modules is that each is designed around 3 key learning sections. Here in Convene Stakeholders, we're really focusing on the building blocks of a responsive feedback approach. That is, gathering the right stakeholders that might influence your program or help in the decision-making process, the importance of creating a learning culture that incentivizes learning and engages staff throughout the responsive feedback process, and then allowing you to assess both your organizational resources and your personal or team resources to see what resources you currently have that could be leveraged throughout this process, and then where you might need to change or improve the resources that you have to set yourself up for success. In our second module, we focus on uncovering assumptions and revealing learning opportunities. First, within this module, we focus on the learning agenda, what it is and why it's important as a roadmap to guide our responsive feedback activities. Next, we discuss a theory of change and map the principles of a theory of change and illustrate how it helps to uncover our assumptions about our program and reveal areas in which we might have uncertainty that we need to probe with a responsive feedback approach. Then we hone in on this process for writing learning questions prompted by our theory of change that we can then explore in our responsive feedback activities. In Module 3, we focus upon building upon the concepts that we learned in the previous module in order to use evidence to address areas of uncertainty that we identified through your theory of change and then addressed in your learning questions. Within this module, we first discuss feedback loops and their importance as you design your responsive feedback approach. Then we go on to discuss the best methods for responsive feedback and really link those to the learning questions that you created in the previous module. Finally, we provide a discussion of how to collect good quality data within the responsive feedback approach and the considerations for balancing time, resources, and data quality as you design your responsive feedback activities. In our fourth and final module, we focus on using evidence to evolve or to make decisions and to move the program forward based on the feedback that you've gathered. First, we provide guidance on how to interpret the evidence that you've gathered through this responsive feedback process. Then we really emphasize how to pause and reflect and how to use this evidence that you've gathered to integrate these feedback loops and to bring in other stakeholders to get through this decision process. And finally, when we put decisions in context, we're thinking about all of the other considerations that impact a decision, how large it is, who else might need to be involved in the decision, and how to really think through how to take all of this that you've put together from the curve process and discuss it with your stakeholders and move forward for action. So as mentioned on the previous slide, this first session is really about providing the building blocks for a responsive feedback approach. Here we're going to focus on identifying stakeholders, creating a learning culture, and assessing your resources so that you enter into the responsive feedback approach with an ability to know your partners, incentivize learning, and then really know what resources you have that you could leverage within this approach.
So, why devote time to preparing for responsive feedback? Creating this environment can help to lay the groundwork for creating more adaptive agile programming. For example, engaging staff with an RF approach, particularly in an organization that promotes and encourages learning may improve your ability to capture viewpoints of frontline workers and gather better quality data. Creating a theory of change that highlights assumptions will help you to probe how your program's environment may impact program activities. It will also help drive learning questions that can examine your activities in more detail. More important, having systems in place to reflect and act on feedback while the program is active in the field can help overcome challenges. For example, it can be difficult to analyze and reflect on feedback in the middle of a busy program cycle. Having systems in place to support this process may increase the success of carving out this important time. Note here that while the full list is for programs that intend to conduct formal RF activities, being mindful of these components, particularly quality data collection, can help to create more meaningful feedback for your organization. Regardless of the scope of your RF activities, being mindful of the resources you have can help to deliver more meaningful feedback.
Before we continue, please find your Module 1 worksheet. As we go through this section, we will pause occasionally so that you fill in your worksheet with information that corresponds with program content. For the first Pause and Reflect section this week, we will discuss stakeholders. A stakeholder is an individual or group you work with who impacts or is impacted by your program. Stakeholders often contribute to program success. Begin your worksheet in Table 1 by listing potential stakeholders in the table that correspond with the questions. Then evaluate the current strength of the relationship with that stakeholder. In Question 2, provide examples of how you typically engage with two of these stakeholders. In our training call this week, we will learn from each other to determine the best ways to engage with different types of stakeholders as we involve them in our responsive feedback approach.
Here, we list many of the groups that we often consider as stakeholders in a responsive feedback approach. As you see, while donors and government officials are key stakeholders, we also include other potential stakeholders. In addition to the high-level decision makers, we emphasize the importance of including those throughout the organization as stakeholders in the process. This includes individuals and groups within the organization that work closely in the front line to execute your program. As we saw in the previous slide, engaging staff in the RF approach can enrich the feedback you receive and provide valuable perspectives on how programs are actually operating in the field. Similarly, we want to consider community partners and other program beneficiaries in our stakeholder list. Programs that are developed collaboratively with those from inside the community have a higher chance of success as they are able to better understand and adapt to the characteristics of the local environment and the beliefs and preferences of different groups that live within the community. Another key component of a successful RF approach is having an organization that promotes and incentivizes learning. Often, this may include providing opportunity to build upon or learn new skills, but also includes a mindset that sees the need for change as progress and not as a failing of the program. Within an organization with a strong learning culture, leaders provide engaged staff with an opportunity to make decisions closer to the front lines.
Savvy used a multi-pronged approach to developing a learning culture, both internally with its program staff and with its partner organizations, so that they could work together to bring about change. Broadly, they removed roadblocks against creative thinking, welcoming ideas on how to advocate for change in different and creative ways. Second, and importantly, they created and invested in spaces for structured reflection. This both occurred internally with frequent pause and reflect sessions and ways to reflect on what is currently working and to course correct if needed, and also with their partner organizations. They used facilitated discussions with partners as a learning tool, bringing together partners from different sectors to learn from each other and collaborate on the best ways to advocate for change. Also, they allowed freedom to fail within their organization and their programs. They were free to halt initiatives that were unlikely to succeed so that they could focus on those with more likely impacts. Along with this, they kept a bank of retrospective stories so that they were able to learn from their past successes and use them in future models across the different states in which they served.
There are multiple ways to promote a learning culture within an organization. Some of these may center on the leadership of an organization and their openness to learning, their willingness to accept the need for change as an opportunity and not as a failing of the program. Leaders may all integrate learning starting at the beginning of the program, emphasizing the need for a learning approach throughout the program lifecycle. Although leaders may drive the overall uptake of a learning culture within an organization, there are other ways to promote learning among your staff and teams. A key approach is to incentivize learning for staff. Another key component that we have touched on in this training is engaging staff as active players in responsive feedback. This includes reframing ideas like monitoring to feel less like an audit and more like a constructive tool that can help identify areas for change. Staff who are actively engaged in this process and feel comfortable highlighting challenges may help to more fully identify where our assumptions may need to be adjusted. They can also point our attention to what is working well within a program and what is not working. In a related vein, gathering evidence that staff feel will be useful and actually is used to inform program activities can act as another lever of engagement. Collecting data with a clear purpose and applicability to informing mid-program adjustments may also be better received by those collecting the data. And that can lead to the collection of better quality evidence. In your module worksheet, we first would like you to list the opportunities that are present at the organizational level in your organization that promote learning, such as building new skills. In question 4, we would like you to reflect on ways that you could promote a learning culture. This may be ways to foster better communication across teams or to engage your staff. Within our formative research, we have often found that organizations working to include responsive feedback in their program may encounter certain types of barriers. Here we list some common themes that may be present in the barriers that programs face to responsive feedback. For example, there may be organizational barriers. For some organizations, it can be difficult to change practices. Or you may have structural or system level barriers. As an example, in the environment or the country or the place you're implementing the program, there may be regulatory barriers, rules, administrative rules that may impact the flexibility of the program. Some have resource barriers. Time and budgets will have to be stretched, may not be enough. Or capability barriers. Staff may not have needed skills. Or you may face environmental barriers, challenges to the implementation in the field.
Savvy placed emphasis on both internal and external skill building to address common capability and resource barriers that are often seen in adaptive programming. Internally, Savvy would recruit the staff from within the partner state in which they were working. This ensured that the staff had knowledge of the local environment and could best understand how the government operated in that environment to best advocate for change. Savvy also aimed to recruit staff who had the commitment, aptitude, and motivation to play a hands-on role in supporting local actors and partner organizations behind the scenes, and invested heavily in building staff confidence, ability, and accountability to play this role effectively. In addition, the recruitment of individuals from within that state meant that they had a direct personal stake in reform as they worked with these partner organizations. Savvy also emphasized working with external partners to help assess their capacity and build skills where needed to advocate for change. This is seen in Jigawa State, in which they worked with civil society organizations to build skills such as budget tracking, project monitoring, and evidence-based advocacy so they could play a direct role in monitoring their government projects. Through emphasizing this skill building with their partner organizations, together, Savvy and their partners were able to address corrupt practices in road construction, complete work on 25 wind-powered boreholes, halt the distribution of tainted fertilizer, and construct 5 culverts to avoid the destruction of rice farmland. As we will see in the next module, there are many benefits to using a theory of change and a responsive feedback approach. Here we see a case in which a theory of change was used to identify and adapt for certain regulations that were present within the environment that may have impacted program success. NigerCare is a project that works with patent and proprietary medicine vendors to grow their business in Nigeria. As they adapted this project from a different country, they realized as they were creating their theory of change that there were certain regulatory concerns that were present in Nigeria for these vendors that were not present in the other country. By accounting for these regulatory barriers within their theory of change, they were able to create new program activities that could address these barriers and better serve their participants. Sometimes, an emergent situation or crisis in the field may impact how a program is able to operate. Such was the case for the LWOL program. LWOL was an educational program in Sierra Leone funded by the International Rescue Committee. Its original focus was on in-school learning opportunities. The program was designed to be iterative, with built-in reflection and opportunities for adaptation. A key characteristic of this project was the trusting relationships LWOL staff had with their donors. This proved to be key when the Ebola crisis hit. As schools were shuttered, LWOL was able to quickly adapt its approach. After schools closed, they conducted an informal risk assessment, which led to an alternative model focused on small group learning. Bridge loans from funders also helped allocate money for help and continued program support under the new structure. Within the project, information flowed freely between donors, implementers, civil society, private sector, and government leaders to create greater trust and mutual understanding. A separate program with rigid funding had to shutter school programs during the crisis.
Assessing your organization's resources can be a very valuable step in preparing for a responsive feedback approach. Reducing duplication in effort, determine efficient ways to gather and interpret evidence, find time for reflection and collaboration, identify ways to leverage current abilities, and where to build new skills. In question 5, we provide a checklist that can help you to assess your organization resources. During our training session, we will discuss this checklist and what other factors may be valuable to add to this list.